Hello again, everyone. I guess I should start just by giving a reminder that our short story essay is due Monday. I forget what that date is. What is it, the first, I think? This coming Monday, though. So you do have the whole day, as long as it's by like the end of the day. And honestly, even if you submitted it at whatever 2 in the morning or something, if you're in a situation like that, I'm not definitely not going to look at them until the next day at the earliest. So I probably wouldn't have much of a problem if it's technically the next day, as long as it's before like the afternoon, I guess, on Tuesday. So I just wanted to remind us all about that. Also, once again, if you submitted a rough draft, my comments are up there. You should take a look at those. Let me know if you have any questions about them. I will say that when I leave comments on drafts, I don't say like do this or do that. So I don't want you to take the things that I'm saying as like, oh, I need to change everything because of the comment they put. I try to more like ask questions, right, and ask you like, well, what about this, or make suggestions. So I do want you to take it that way. Unless I say something very direct, like I don't think this works, or if I told you that I didn't feel like you were on doing the right topic, or I didn't feel like you were doing what the assignment asked for, then that I would definitely take as a change that you should make. But mostly I try to just ask questions or make suggestions. So I would take the comments kind of in that spirit. But for this video, I do want to answer the questions that people submitted. I was going to post this video earlier in the week, but I don't think I saw too many submissions until, kind of like Thursday or Friday. So I figured it'd be better for me to answer a larger number of questions than to, post it on Tuesday or something. So hopefully this still gives you some time to, incorporate these answers into your revision as you work on getting your final draft together. All right, so let's get into it. This first question has two parts. The first one says, if most novels tend to send an intentional message to the reader, do authors always claim that the message that their books send is good or bad? So this is kind of like a more general, kind of theoretical question. Do authors always claim that the message is good or bad? I would say that most authors, I think, tend to say that they are not putting messages in there. I think a lot of artists just they're like, well, I'm just being creative, or I'm just trying to make something cool or beautiful, or whatever it is. So I think artists rarely think about what they're doing in terms of messages. And like you said in this question, if they send intentional messages, I don't know if the messages are always intentional. And honestly, I don't really care, right? I think I mentioned this before, but like, even if an author comes out and says like, well, this is what I meant, I still think that we have to go with what is on the page, right? With what is in the story and the evidence that the story itself provides. So my kind of position usually is I don't really care what the author wanted it to mean, or if they wanted it to mean anything. Like, yeah, I think a lot of authors, when people start talking about the messages in their movies, they're like, well, I wasn't doing that, or you're making that up, you're putting it on it. And to me, we need to just focus on the evidence in the piece of art itself. Okay, so the second part of this question, they said, is the purpose of writing this kind of literary essay to discover a hidden message in the book and make an argument about this message? I mean, yeah, I think that's generally in the right direction. So this person said make an argument about this message. Your argument should be, I think, what the message that the story is sending is, what the message is. You're trying to prove that the story is sending the message you say it is. That the story, whatever, is endorsing gender stereotypes, or the story is criticizing gender stereotypes. Depending on what you're writing about. But your job is to make an argument about what the message is, right? The other thing, I don't know, a hidden message. I don't know if I would call it a hidden message, because again, that kind of implies that the author is putting it there on purpose to be decoded, and I just don't really think that's true. I think we can. It's not that someone was hiding a message the whole time. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. We'll never really know. But like, what we're trying to do is just see if there is a message, and if there is, well, what is it? And again, I would just emphasize how important the evidence in the text is, and that's why we need to use a lot of direct quotes from the story. I would say for an essay like this, I think you probably need, I don't know, 4 quotes from the story, maybe more. I always think that quotes are good, and especially if you're struggling with making the paper long enough. Quotes are always good because you have to explain what's going on with the quote, connect it back to your argument, and that makes it longer as well. All right, moving on. Second question here. This person says, I am starting to confuse myself on how to quote in terms of formulating it. How do I stop myself from straying away from my points? Okay, so kind of two questions here too. The first one is about using quotes and I guess formatting them. So when we use quotes, I'm probably going to do a video on this coming up, but I'll just say for now that when we include a quote from the story or from a source, we generally want to introduce the quote and also explain the quote. In terms of introducing the quote, we just want to make sure that it kind of flows with our paragraph. That we either say, James Joyce writes, or in Dubliners it says, or something like that, or incorporate it into our own sentence. But you just want to make sure that the quote doesn't feel like it's coming out of nowhere, like it's just been dropped from the sky, you know. So you want to incorporate it into your paragraphs, and then you want to explain it. So explaining the quote is showing the reader how that quote, that piece of evidence, connects back to your argument, right? How does the quote that you're showing us connect to your thesis? How does it prove your argument about the message the story's sending? So you want to always make sure you're introducing it and then you're explaining it. Explaining it probably more important, right? Because that kind of tells the reader, like, here's why I showed you this quote. Here's the point of looking back at this quote. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. In terms of formatting the quote, I guess I'll talk here about in-text citations one more time. And you know what? I guess I'm just going to go ahead and put up a picture. So let me see if I can make that happen. Okay, so as you can see in this picture, you have your quote from the story, right? I just picked like a random quote from one of the James Joyce stories. So you're going to have your quote, right? Quotation marks, right? Like I said, introduce the quote, set it up. And then right after the quote, you have this in-text citation. And just like I have in the picture here, it is parentheses, the author's last name. In this case, I'm putting Joyce, but you know, whichever story you're writing about or whatever outside source you're using, that author's last name, and then the page number. And I just put a random in. I'm going to put like 50 in there, just, you know, and just whatever page it appears on. And you know, for some of the stories, I gave you scans from books, so they should have the page numbers in like the upper corner. For the ones that are just like PDFs, you know, just use your best judgment. What page it is on the PDF is fine. So yeah, parentheses, author's last name, page number, close parentheses, period. And that's the in-text citation. I'll talk about the works cited one in a later question. So the other part of the question this person asked, they said, how do I stop myself from straying away from my points? That's a great question. I think that can be tough, right? Like we'll start talking about one thing and then we just connect that to something else. And then before we know it, we're like, well, why was I talking about any of this? Where was I, you know? And I think this is something that happens, you know, like when we tell stories or in our everyday speech. So I think this is why when we write, and I did a video on this, you can go back and watch it. This is why I think outlining is so important. And I'll just repeat real quick some of the things I said in that video, that I would really encourage you guys to at least have bullet points for what your paragraphs are going to be before you get too far into the essay, right? Before we really start writing a lot of it, I would want to get clear on what your thesis is, and that might change once you start writing, and that's okay. You know, we just have to make the accommodations for that. So I'd want to get clear on what the thesis is, and then try to come up with main ideas for each of your paragraphs, right? Like which story is the paragraph going to be talking about, and then what point is it going to be making. If you're writing about like Evelyn, you might want to have a paragraph about the reason she wants to leave. You might want to have a paragraph about why she doesn't want to leave. I don't know. It all has to relate back to your thesis, right? So in terms of making sure you don't stray away from your points, I think by knowing what the main idea of each paragraph is supposed to be, that kind of forces us stay on that one point before moving on. And again, I think this also helps with making a paper longer, because it kind of forces you to say everything you have to say on that one point before you move on to something else. So I think that's an organization problem. I think that's an outlining problem. So I know outlines seem dumb, but I'm telling you, even just some bullet points. So just so that like when you're writing, you can look back on your piece of paper and go, oh, this is what it's supposed to be about. I'm supposed to be proving that Evelyn, that the story, reinforces sexist ideology, goes against it, whatever it is. But yeah, so I would have an outline written down so you can refer back to that, make sure you're staying on point. Okay, next question here. This person says, would it be acceptable to use quotes to use two quotes from two different sources, which are writing upon two different topics, as long as the quotes used are relevant to the main theme or issue at hand, uh, taking place throughout the short story? So I think this person, I'm not sure I totally understand this question. Maybe if I don't answer it right, you can send me an email. But they're asking about using two quotes from two different sources on two different topics. So I think I said this in the research and citations video, but there's kind of two different ways to do research for this kind of essay. One is to try to find essays writing about the story you're writing about, and they are out there. I've seen a few of you incorporate them into your rough drafts even. So keep looking if you're not finding people writing on these stories, especially the James Joyce stories are extremely popular. Virginia Woolf is extremely popular. Olive Schreiner might be a little bit harder. She's probably the less well known of the authors that we read here. But you should be able to find people writing about these stories, except maybe the Olive Schreiner. The other option is to find an article about more your topic, right? So if you're writing about gender, you could find an article that just talks about how women throughout history have been expected to sacrifice themselves for the family in a way that men have not, right? And you could just find a kind of article that's about gender or sexism or whatever, and then kind of apply that to the story, right? Or if you're doing the topic about history, you could use like that reading that I did about the number of people in World War I who died and the new technologies and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you can get sources either about the story itself or about your general topic and then relate it to the story. So I don't know. I think that's my answer to that question. So of course you can have two different sources, two different topics. Yeah, that all works. Okay, next person says, when writing this short story essay, I sometimes have trouble with expanding on my point without writing too much fluff. I find it difficult to focus on that one topic that I'm geared toward veering off. Sometimes I do this by composing something different when I'm just trying to explain my points. I feel this way because the stories presented are great, interesting stories and have similar correlation, but they're not identical. Um, okay, so I think this kind of goes back to what I was saying about outlining for that other question, right? I think this is an organization problem. If you have trouble expanding on your points, or feel like when you try to expand, you end up getting off topic, I think it's because like if you don't have an outline, we sit down at the computer and we have like, I don't know, 5 ideas in our heads, right? We're like, all right, the story Evelyn, it shows us that the traditional gender roles are bad because it's because of these gender roles that Evelyn is in such a bad situation, and that she can't escape either in her own family or by going with Frank. She's kind of screwed either way, right? I'm not saying that's at least one argument you could make about that story. There's other ones too. Um, but if you were talking about that, you might have a few different reasons to back that up, right? You might want to look at the ending of the story. You might want to look at the promise to her mother. You might want to look at, the fact that she has an older brother who, maybe he should be the one who's responsible for the kids more than her because, he's older, presumably more responsible, has more money, stuff like that. So you might have all those things in your head, right? So you sit down, you start typing, and you start talking about the first thing, and then you write a few sentences about that, and then you move to the next one, a few sentences about that, and then before you know it, you've written like a page, but that was all you had. You kind of spent all of your ammo in just one page. And I know I already said it, but this is why outlines help. If you have an outline, if you know the one topic that's supposed to be discussed in that paragraph, if you know the main idea of that paragraph, and maybe like a quote or two that you're going to use to back that up, then I think it'll be a lot easier to expand on your point and to avoid, veering off into something else, like this person said. So I think it's an organization thing. I think it's an outlining thing. Make some bullet points. Know what the main ideas of your paragraphs are supposed to be, and make sure that every paragraph connects back to the thesis. That's very important. The purpose of each of your paragraphs should be to back up your thesis, should be to prove your argument, right? So if at the end of the paragraph, the reader is like, well, what does this have to do with your argument? Or how does this connect back to the thesis? That's very bad. That's not what we want. So make sure that each of your paragraphs, and sometimes it's good to do this, maybe the last couple sentences, just remind like, okay, so we looked at all this evidence and here is how this is proving my argument, right? So I think that can help too. This person also mentioned like feeling like you're writing too much fluff. And something I would say with that is, I think because we've talked so much about these stories and because I've had to talk so much about them because of the online nature of all of this, it might seem like the points that you're making, you might feel like they're obvious, Like maybe you feel like it's obvious that the stranger is showing us that Hammond sucks and that his controlling attitudes are bad. That might seem obvious to you because we've talked about it so much, but remember who your audience is, okay? Don't think about just me as your audience. I know that I've read these stories many times. I've taught them many times. I have my own thoughts that are pretty well developed about what I think about these stories. But don't just think about me as the audience. Think about your peers. Think about not just people in this class, but other people who are, your age who go to Bergen, or just like a random freshman or sophomore here at Bergen. If I pull someone random in from the hallway, imagine that's the person reading your essay, right? And for that person, I think the general students generally are kind of resistant to a lot of these ideas about messages that the story sends and what it's actually saying. I think most students have kind of had an attitude it's like, well, you're just making that up, or like, that's just your opinion, or whatever, or it could mean something else, or actually it's just a piece of art, it doesn't mean anything. So I feel like that attitude is pretty common among students, and that's your audience, So it might seem like what you're saying is obvious because of how much I've talked about it and what we've talked about in the discussions and everything like that. But it's not. Remember who your audience is. You have to convince them, right? They're probably not going to want to agree with you at first. Okay. Next question. Second to last one here. Or no, third to last. We're almost done. I'm going to try to move more quickly. I'm taking too long. This person says, for this essay, we're able to choose all the stories we learn about, or do we have to choose just one that fits the topic we choose? Okay, let me stop right there. So we've read 5 stories, right? Do not write about all 5. I would cap it at 2. I would say you can write about 2 of the stories. And it's because I'm trying to help you out here. I know it might seem like I'm trying to make it harder by not letting you write about 3 or 4 of the stories, but I'm trying to help you because if you write about 4 of them, there's just no way you can adequately make an argument, give evidence, and explain your argument fully in 4 pages. There's no way you can do 4 stories in 4 pages. I refuse to believe it. Similarly, if you are planning on having just 1 paragraph about each of the stories, it's not enough. You need more than 1 paragraph. These arguments are more complicated than that. They're bigger than that. You need more evidence than that to really convince the reader. So I would always go on the side of having more evidence rather than less. Look for more quotes. Are there more parts of the stories that back this up? Remember that your reader could be skeptical of what you're saying, and they might be like, well, I think you're just making this up. So 2 is the most that I want you to pick. So this person goes on to say, what I found difficult about the essay is that there's a lot of stories. Sometimes I'll mix them up, which is why I picked 1 to write about, but I don't think my essay will be up to par if I use only 1 story. It can and it will. You just have to really fully analyze it. You have to really back up all of your points, give a lot of quotes, find the research, and have an outline, again, to know what all your different main ideas are. Because I guarantee you that you can get to 4 pages just doing 1 story. I've written, 10 pages on 1 story. And that's not to compare you guys to me. Obviously, I was an English major and very interested in this stuff, but you can do it. You can do it. Like I said, 2 at the most. If you're not getting to 4 pages writing about 2 stories, you need to back it up more. You need more evidence. Okay, next one. This person says, mostly I have trouble citing quotes or wrapping up my conclusions. How do I cite? No, I'm going to move past that. How do I successfully wrap up all of my ideas in the conclusion without making it look like I just want to end the essay right then and there? Okay, so 2 questions here. One about citations. And I think I kind of talked about that, right? The next question, I'm going to talk about the works cited. So again, in-text citations, after the quote, the parentheses, author's name, page number, all that. This person also asked about conclusions. So I would encourage you guys to go back and watch my video on conclusions that I think I posted for week 5 or 6, the last week. And like I said in that, for your conclusion, I would consider kind of the bigger picture, answer the question of so what, tell your reader why this matters, right? Reinforce your argument, yes, but also tell them why your argument matters. Why should we care if the story is undermining or reinforcing sexist ideology? Whichever one of those you're saying that it's doing, why should I care? Why was it important that I read this essay? What should I be thinking about as I go back to my life now that I've read your essay? One other thing I wanted to mention, kind of for the last question, I just wanted to mention again this idea of close reading. So if we're having trouble expanding our points or making the paper long enough, I think I mentioned this, but close reading. This is looking really diving in on the specific word choices that are used and how they can connect to the message. So, for instance, in The Stranger, I think I talked about how the word small gets used over and over again of Hammond thinking about Janie and how that kind of shows how he thinks of her as you know, more someone who needs to be protected and controlled and guided and not like a self-sufficient human who can operate on their own. And so like do you see how much I'm making out of just like one word basically? This makes your essay a lot longer. This helps you to expand your points. So you can really dissect like the word choices that are being made. Because again, even though you know there's a lot of individual words in these stories, they're not that long, right? So especially if something gets repeated multiple times, I would really try to dial in on specific word choices to you know flesh out your analysis. Okay, last question. This person says, I would like to know how I can add the story Evelyn as an MLA format in my essay. Great question. So I'm taking this question to be more about the works cited that goes at the end of the essay, right? So I'm going to include another picture here, and I'm going to throw it up right now. Okay, so this is the works cited page, right? As you can see at the top, we have centered the words works cited, not bibliography or references or anything like that. Works cited is what you put at the top. So you can see like the citation itself, there's a lot of stuff in it, right? You can see it has like the author's name, the name of the story, the publisher, when it was published, where it was published, all this stuff. I wouldn't expect you to remember all the things that need to go into this. What I would encourage you to do is, and again, go back and watch the video I did on citations, is to go to that Purdue OWL website, the Purdue OWL website that I put a link to in one of the previous weeks. And they have a generator there where you can basically just type in the story and it'll give you a citation. I'm not, since I'm giving you guys these like scanned copies, I'm not all that worried about you having like, you know, the exact edition that I scanned it from. And obviously some of them are PDFs, so those aren't like actual physical books. So whatever comes up is fine. Just type in Catherine Mansfield, The Stranger, or you know Evelyn by James Joyce, whatever it is, and you can just use like whichever one comes up. I'm fine with that as long as I see you guys like making you know a good effort towards this. Um, I'm fine with that as long as we get used to the process of kind of learning how to do this. All right. Well, this was longer than I took me longer than I thought. But I appreciate the questions. I hope that I answered them pretty well. I would have liked to get a few more of them. Didn't get all that many. So please email me if you have any questions I didn't answer or if I misunderstood your question or anything like that. And I'll have more videos for you coming soon.